aspects of life, to see what they feel about those different aspects, and to be able to develop in the world that surrounds you. And therefore you find that eloquence and the ability to use the tongue in the proper way is a gift that has to be protected. Amir al-Mu'mineen has a quite beautiful hadith when he says, the tongue of the human being, جرمه صغير وجرمه ثقيل. The tongue of the human being, the weight is so small, yet the power is so devastating. If you were to get a tongue now and place it on the weighing scales, you'll find that it only weighs a few grams, let's just say. But how powerful and how devastating is the tongue of the human being? That you could be the tallest person in the world, or you could be the shortest. But how you use that tongue can be a way where you can defeat the opposition or anyone who stands in your way. And therefore you found every prophet of God recognized that the way they use their tongue, the way they use their freedom of speech, would make or break their message. Because we know very well that every prophet went to their people and spoke to their people in the language of their people. Spoke to them in their language doesn't just mean they spoke Arabic to the Arabians, or Hebrew to those who came from that area, or Aramaic, or any of the other languages. No. It meant, number one, they spoke at the level of their people. That's the first thing. Number two, they spoke the language of their people. And number three, they recognized that eloquence was vital, as in people in Mecca would not have come towards Islam were it not for the eloquence of Rasulullah when he used to speak Arabic, and the power of the Arabic of the Quran. And that's why we find Prophet Musa alayhi salam himself clearly stating that when he wanted to go towards Fir'aun, he wanted his brother Harun to be his spokesman. Why? It's not that Musa necessarily had a defect. He just felt that Harun was more eloquent than he'll ever be. And so he came forward and said, Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wahlul uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli waj'al li waziran min ahli Harun akhi. He wanted Allah to remove the knot from his tongue. At the same time, he wanted his successor, Harun, to be his spokesman in the court of Fir'aun. Because now, if I go towards an ambassador of a country, and I start stuttering when I talk, or I mumble when I talk, while I may know what I'm talking about, it doesn't come out clearly. Whereas when I know that I can talk eloquently, then what do we find? We find that the message gets across in a clearer way. That's why the tongue of the human being and the power of speech can be used in a way positive or in a way which is negative. As in when you look in the Quran and you look in the 21st century Muslim society especially, there are many who waste the power of speech. Instead, you find that the power of speech is employed in gossip. And the Quran says, Ya ayyuha alladhina amanu, ijtanibu kathiran min adh-dhann, inna ba'da adh-dhanni ithm. You find that the tongue is employed in ghiba. وَلَا يَغْتَبْ بَعْضَكُمْ بَعْضًا أَيُحِبُّ أَحَدَكُمْ أَن يَأْكُلَ لَحْمَ أَخِيهِ مَيْتًا فَكَرِهْتُمُوهُ. The Quran forbids you from backbiting. You find, for example, there are some who abuse. They come on the pulpit, they may abuse. They may come off the pulpit, they may abuse. And the Quran says, وَلَا تَسُبُّ الَّذِينَ يَدْعُونَ مِن دُونِ اللَّهِ فَيَسُبُّ اللَّهَ عَدْوًا بِغَيْرِ عِلْمٍ. The Quran addressed the people of where? The people of Mecca, the Muslims who were there, saying, don't abuse the idols of the idol worshippers, because it may turn around against that which you worship. The point being that the freedom of speech isn't meant to be used to backbite or to gossip, or freedom of speech isn't meant to be used for a person to go and abuse. On the contrary, the freedom of speech is meant to be used to open up the mindset of the society that surrounds us, to remove misconceptions, to allow people to be more free in their thinking, to give people a vision, to encourage others to come and do good deeds. The Quran, for example, says, ادعو إلى سبيل ربك بالحكمة وموعظة الحسنة وجادلهم بالتي هي أحسن. Speak to them with wisdom and with mercy and with that which is better. And that's why we find that our Imam in Sham wasn't the first of Al Muhammad to give a great sermon. Before him, his great-grandfather, the Holy Prophet, had given many a great sermon. That farewell sermon which he gave on the day of Ghadir and the farewell sermon which he gave in Hajj were amongst the most beautiful sermons ever given. You find his grandfather, Amir al-Mu'mineen, Nahj al-Balagha, is full of sermons with quite unbelievable Arabic eloquence, let alone Islamic thought. You find his grandmother, Fatima al-Zahra, in her khutbah of Fadak, the Arabic is destructive. Even his sister Zainab, when she gave, or his auntie Zainab, when she gave her khutbah in the court of Ibn Ziyad in Kufa. Ibn Ziyad said to her, your Arabic is quite strong. She said, I'm only speaking to you like that. You haven't heard my real Arabic. If I went into depth in my Arabic, nobody here would understand what I'm saying. Therefore, the eloquence that was there was something which was able to change the people. And that's why the Imam, before he began his khutbah, he gave us 3 prerequisites to any majlis. Because that was one of the first majalis in history. Therefore, the Imam gave us 3 prerequisites that before you organize any majlis, or before you give any majlis, before you organize any khutbah, or before you give any khutbah, there are 3 prerequisites any person who sits on the mimbar of the Imam, or any person who organizes a talk should know. Number 1, he says, I have said what I have said, Ravan lillah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The first aim of any majlis, be it the organizer or be it the person speaking, is that it should be for the pleasure of Allah and nobody else. Because unfortunately our pulpits for years had people who did it for the entertainment, as in people who sat and asked the crowd, what type of topics do you like? Not what type of topics am I going to make? No. What type of topics do you like? We like topics on this same person for 10 nights. No problem. It's Muharram, he speaks about that person. And you'll see for 10 nights the same topic on that person's life, which has absolutely nothing to do with the 10th of Muharram. Why? Because he's thinking the only way that I'm going to be invited again is by speaking about that person. What was this place? A place to please the people or to please Allah? That there are certain people who come up here are scared to come with new knowledge. Why? Because they say we might not get invited again. So what? There'll always be a majlis for Al Muhammad somewhere. Don't ever think I won't get invited. Those who are scared to discuss taboo subjects, why don't you discuss? Oh, because the people might get a bit iffy about me and I might not come back. Let them get iffy. There's a million other places which will invite you. Because it's not you who make your majlis, it's Allah who blesses your majlis. The Imam said that the person who sits on the pulpit should do it for the pleasure of Allah and nobody else. When you know you are narrating something which is not reliable, don't narrate it just because you've heard it narrated before. You have a responsibility to say, would Allah be pleased with this narration? Or do I know something which I'm not telling others? Likewise, the institution which you recite for as a speaker, are you saying what you're saying to please the people, to please the institution, or to please Allah? It's interesting that whenever a speaker speaks against the institution who have invited him, you never see that speaker again. And you start to think to yourself, hold on, are we lecturing for the institution or for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? That's why you find that today when there are speakers who say things to please Allah, you'll find people in their crowd are actually willing to throw them off the mimbar. The people, the crowd, the majority of whom are laymen, in some cases in Islamic history, you'll find that they'll come and say, no, for 30 years I've heard this. Who are you to say this? Who are you to tell me what to say? As in, if you've got your points of references, come bring them forward, we'll discuss them. Whichever books of history you want, bring them all forward, let's discuss them. But if you don't have those points, then don't say, I've heard 30 years of majalis. Doesn't matter. You could have heard 18,000 majalis. It does not necessarily mean that the person giving the lecture is doing it for the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It could just be someone who continues it. Imam says, the first reason I am giving the khutbah, Raban lillah, number 1. Number 2, the second reason for a majlis, before the Imam begins, he says, the second reason, salah. Salah means what?